Something happened on March 10, 2026, that most Western media barely covered, and what happened on that day changes everything you think you understand about this war. Saudi Arabia and Iran, enemies for 45 years, mortal adversaries in a regional Cold War that has shaped Middle Eastern politics since 1979, signed a comprehensive security cooperation agreement, not a ceasefire, not a temporary truce, a formal alliance, and the person who brokered it was not an American diplomat, it was a Chinese foreign minister. Let that sink in for a moment. The two most powerful states in the Gulf region, representing Sunni and Shia Islam's geopolitical divide, just formalized cooperation while American forces are actively bombing Iranian targets. This is not a footnote in the war. This is the story of the war. Because what Mohammed bin Salman just did is not a betrayal in the emotional sense. It is a calculated strategic realignment based on cold assessment of where power is flowing. And that flow is moving away from Washington faster than most Americans realize. Start with the agreement itself. On March 10th, Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan and Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian signed what they called a comprehensive security cooperation framework in Beijing. The agreement included mutual defense consultation, intelligence sharing on regional threats, and most critically, a joint economic development fund capitalized at $50 billion, with China providing the initial $20 billion as seed investment. The defense clause is carefully worded but unambiguous. Both parties agree to consult on security threats to either nation and coordinate responses to external aggression. That is not a mutual defense treaty in the NATO sense, but it is a commitment that if one side faces existential threat, the other side participates in the response. Iran is under sustained American and Israeli air campaign. Saudi Arabia just agreed to consult on response to external aggression. Connect those dots. The economic fund is equally significant. $50 billion for joint infrastructure projects, port development, and energy corridor construction, linking Saudi oil fields to Iranian refineries and onward to Chinese markets. The entire architecture bypasses the Strait of Hormuz, which is currently closed, and creates overland routes through Iraq that neither American naval power nor Israeli air power can easily interdict. This is permanent infrastructure designed to function regardless of American presence in the Gulf. Now let me tell you why this happened. Mohammed bin Salman looked at American security guarantees and decided they are no longer credible. And he has evidence. When the Houthis launched drone and missile attacks on Saudi oil facilities in September 2019, hitting Abqaiq and Khurais, they knocked out 50% of Saudi oil production in a single strike. The damage was massive. The economic impact immediate. And the American response was nothing. President Trump declined to retaliate militarily. He offered to sell more missile defense systems, but he did not strike back. The message that sent to Riyadh was clear. American security guarantees are conditional. They depend on American domestic politics. They are not automatic. Fast forward to February 2026. The United States launches Operation Epic Fury against Iran. Massive air campaign, thousands of strikes, Supreme Leader Khamenei killed, and 6 major American allies, Australia, Germany, Greece, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom, all declined to send military support. The most powerful military alliance in history fractures when tested. MBS watched that. He watched American allies say no, and he drew the correct conclusion. If America's closest partners are not willing to join this fight, what does that say about American ability to project power in sustained conflict? Then add the Strait of Hormuz closure, 20% of global oil supply offline, Brent crude above 110 per barrel, Saudi Arabia, whose entire economy runs on oil revenue, watching the primary export route shut down by Iranian forces that American military power cannot reopen. The U.S. Navy cannot clear a 33-kilometer waterway. That is an observation about the limits of naval power against distributed anti-ship missiles and drone swarms in littoral environments. The strategic implication is that American military dominance, which Saudi Arabia has relied on since the 1970s, has operational limits that Iran has successfully exploited. MBS is 41 years old. He is not operating on Cold War assumptions about American omnipotence. He is operating on real-time data about American constraints. And the data says that the security architecture that has protected Saudi Arabia for 50 years is degrading. So he acted. But there is another layer to this. This is not just about security. This is about the future of energy markets and who controls the infrastructure that moves oil from the ground to consumers. For 50 years, Saudi oil has flowed primarily to Western markets and been denominated in dollars. The petrodollar system. Saudi Arabia sells oil, receives dollars, invests those dollars in American Treasury securities, which keeps American borrowing costs low and the dollar strong. The Beijing agreement creates an alternative. Saudi oil flows to Chinese markets, payment in yuan, investment in Chinese infrastructure projects under Belt and Road. The $50 billion joint fund is capitalized in yuan, not dollars. The infrastructure being built connects Gulf energy supplies to Asian demand through routes that do not touch American-controlled maritime choke points. This is the beginning of a parallel system. MBS is not doing this because he dislikes America. He is doing it because he is diversifying risk. If American security guarantees are uncertain, if American military power has exploitable limits, if the global economy is fragmenting into competing blocs, then Saudi Arabia needs to position itself in multiple systems simultaneously. That is not betrayal. That is rational hedging by a leader who understands that the world is changing. An inflexible loyalty to a declining guarantor is a poor survival strategy. Did the United States know this was coming? Yes. American intelligence services track Saudi Foreign Ministry communications. They knew MBS was negotiating with Tehran. They knew China was mediating. The question is why Washington did not prevent it. And the answer is that Washington has limited leverage. What can the United States credibly threaten? Cut off arms sales. Saudi Arabia is already diversifying suppliers, buying Chinese drones, negotiating with Russia on air defense. Withdraw security guarantees. Those guarantees are already perceived as unreliable. Sanction Saudi Arabia, the second largest oil producer in the world, during an energy crisis where oil is above $110 per barrel? That would spike prices further and damage American consumers. The leverage runs both ways. This is what a multipolar world looks like in practice. American influence is one variable among several, and regional powers make independent calculations based on their own interests, rather than automatic alignment with Washington. The timing of the agreement is not coincidental. March 10, 2026 is 11 days into Operation Epic Fury. American forces are fully committed. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Oil prices are spiking. And in the middle of this crisis, Saudi Arabia formalizes an agreement with the country America is bombing. That timing is a message. Saudi Arabia is no longer willing to subordinate its interests to American strategy in the region. MBS is declaring independence. Not full independence, but strategic autonomy. The ability to make deals that serve Saudi interests even when those deals conflict with American objectives. And once that threshold is crossed, it does not uncross. This is a permanent shift. Consider what this means for Israel. Gulf Arab states are no longer automatically in the anti-Iran column. They are in the hedge your bets column. Saudi Arabia is not going to join Iran in attacking Israel, but Saudi Arabia is also not going to cooperate with Israeli intelligence on Iranian targets. It is not going to allow overflight for Israeli strike missions. Israel's strategic environment just got significantly more constrained. For the United States, the implications are even broader. The petrodollar system is not dead, but it is wounded. Every oil transaction in yuan rather than dollars is a small reduction in global dollar demand. Every Saudi investment in Chinese infrastructure rather than U.S. treasuries is a small reduction in demand for American debt. Individually, these shifts are manageable. Cumulatively, over years, they erode the structural advantages that have allowed the United States to run large deficits without immediate consequences. American borrowing costs rise. Inflation becomes harder to control. The ability to finance military operations through debt issuance becomes more expensive. These are not 2026 problems. These are 2028 to the 30 problems. But they start now. There is also a broader question about alliance structures in a multipolar world. The United States built its post-1945 order on a hub-and-spoke model. Washington at the center, bilateral alliances radiating outward. That model worked when American power was overwhelming. But when American power has constraints, when allies start making side deals, the hub-and-spoke model becomes a hub-and-tangle, and the country at the center has less control than it assumes. MBS is not the first to recognize this. Erdogan in Turkey has been playing both sides for a decade. Modi in India maintains strategic autonomy as national policy. Bin Salman is just the most significant recent example because Saudi Arabia has been the anchor of American policy in the Gulf since the 1970s. If that anchor is drifting, the entire regional architecture is unstable. Let me be clear about what I am not saying. I am not saying Saudi Arabia is now an Iranian ally in the sense of shared objectives. I am not saying MBS has abandoned relations with Washington. I'm not saying this agreement means Saudi Arabia will actively oppose American interests. What I'm saying is that the assumptions that have governed U.S.-Saudi relations for 50 years, the assumption of automatic alignment, the assumption that Saudi Arabia needs America more than America needs Saudi Arabia, those assumptions are no longer operative, and policy built on obsolete assumptions fails when tested. The question for American strategists is what comes next. Does Washington accept this new reality and adjust? Does it attempt to reassert dominance through pressure? Does it write off the Gulf and reorient toward other priorities? Each option has costs. Acceptance means acknowledging reduced influence. Pressure risks pushing Saudi Arabia further toward China. Reorientation means abandoning interests built over decades. There is no cost-free choice. What happened on March 10th is that the world changed in a way most people have not processed yet. A change that does not announce itself with explosions, a change that happens in conference rooms with signing ceremonies covered by diplomatic press, but a change that will shape the next decade of Middle East politics and global energy markets more than any single battle in this war. Mohammed bin Salman looked at the map, looked at the data, and made a calculated decision that American security guarantees are no longer sufficient. And he formalized an alternative. That is not betrayal. That is adaptation to a world where power is distributed and loyalty is conditional and survival requires flexibility. The age of automatic American dominance in the Gulf is over. What replaces it is still being written, but the first chapter was drafted in Beijing on March 10th, and the protagonist is not Washington.